Okay, so we're going to kick things off now. Welcome to everybody. I am Sarah Guiry. I'm the cartographic and managing editor with the Irish Historic Towns Atlas, which is based here in the Royal Irish Academy. And we're convening this seminar, our annual seminar today, with the Irish Walled Towns Network Initiative of the Heritage Council. So on behalf of both those groups, welcome to everybody that has got up early and come here and joined us today. I'm going to hand over to President of the Royal Irish Academy, Professor Pat Guiry, in a minute. But before I do that, just to let you know, if anything happens, the escape exits are right, the door to the right there, and then are straight out the front door when you came in. So please turn your phones to silent and enjoy your day. Just to introduce Professor Pat Guiry, the President of the Royal Irish Academy.
Agus cóide, is mis an dútar an útran agad a bhríogan na hÉireann agus tá áthas orm bheith an seo agus fáilte romh go léir go dtí teachan agad. Quick question for everyone in the audience. How many times, is this anyone here first time in Academy House? Yeah, okay, small percentage, but welcome. And I hope you're impressed by our facilities. What a fantastic room to hold a seminar in. So I'm delighted to welcome you here to Academy House for this Irish Historic Towns Atlas Seminar, which is a much anticipated event each May in the Academy's calendar. And a particular welcome to those who have travelled from far and near. When I looked at the programme earlier, that includes places like Derry, Limerick, Belfast, Roscommon, Maynooth, and the University of Bradford, amongst others. So just a few words about the Royal Irish Academy first to sort of give you some context. It's Ireland's learned society, and it unites STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, with the humanities to create a vibrant, multidisciplinary forum that harnesses a wealth of perspectives to address the intricate, complex challenges of our time through a collaborative, trans and multidisciplinary approach. Our purpose is to convene, share and inform knowledge and learning as a service to the public good. I'm sure the public realises that, but we're doing it anyway. And that facilitating discourse that spans the full spectrum of scholarly disciplines. It's getting darker and darker, actually. I don't know, can you still see me while knock shivers going on? I can just about make out my text here, so that's good. Through the provision of independent expertise and evidence-based advice, the Academy stands as a champion of informed decision-making. So we tap into international networks such as the European Academy and Science Advisory Council, that's ESAC, and the Celtic Academies Alliance, that's the Learned Society of Wales and the Royal Society of Edinburgh. And that opens up international opportunities for Irish researchers. And in 2023, we established the Young Academy of Ireland, a network of early career researchers and innovators. So the Royal Irish Academy currently runs 7 academic research programs at the leading edge of scholarship in their respective disciplines. These and their research outputs give the institution particular academic strengths in Irish history, cartography, digital archives, and lexicography. Academy research programs combine with areas in which the Academy Library and its collections are exceptionally rich, including Irish language and literature, linguistics, the history and culture of Ireland, and archaeology. Academy research programs publish regularly and play a vibrant role in academic and public life in Ireland and across the globe. The Irish Historic Towns Atlas is one of the gems of these programs. This time last year, we're in Cork City for the launch and related seminar on the Cork Atlas. Number 32, if I remember correctly. We are delighted to be back in Academy House this year, but also glad to see Cork. Some people describe it as the real capital. I'm from Tipperary, so I don't know if I'd attest to that. But anyway, firmly on the programme, with a paper by Councillor Kieran McCarthy. I don't know if Kieran is here. Not yet. Still in the taxi. On the train, actually, we had an admittance day last Friday, and we had a severe impact of trains from Cork. The first one at 7 o'clock got as far as Mallow and then stopped and blocked everyone else from coming. So we had a very UCC lacking admittance day, if we want to call it that, on Friday. Anyway, so maybe that train. And as those of you who were in Cork, he memorably officiated at that Cork launch. So this year's seminar, as you can see, Water, Towns and Topography, is being convened in association with the Irish Walled Towns Network, which is an important initiative of the Heritage Council. The links between the Heritage Council and the Royal Irish Academy are strong, and we particularly value this collaboration between the Irish Historic Towns Atlas and the Irish Walled Towns Network. Today's topic, water, and we know a lot about water in Ireland, as you can imagine, is a particular concern in the urban context, and understanding its role from the heritage perspective is something worth exploring, which this seminar promises to do. Thanks in advance to the 17 speakers who have prepared papers for today. So within the Royal Irish Academy, I wish to acknowledge the work of Sarah Guiry, who's the managing editor, also to Jennifer Moore and Rachel Murray, and thanks to all the staff, Murphy, I should say, and thanks to all the staff across the Academy, particularly the publications team under the leadership of Ruth Hegarty, who play a key role in the Irish Historic Towns Atlas publications. Also thanks to the editorial board of the Irish Historic Towns Atlas, Michael Potterton, Ruth McManus, and Jonathan Wright. So on display in the cases of the library is an exhibition on historical meteorological observations, which includes registers in the archives of the Royal Irish Academy dating back to the 18th and 19th centuries, with the oldest instrumental observations registered in 1783. The Irish Historic publications are on sale in the hall. There's only 210 shopping days to Christmas, just to warn you. And there are various displays in the front two rooms where the coffee breaks will be held. I now hand you over to the Chief Executive Officer and my colleague on Academic Council, Virginia Teehan, elected as a member of the Royal Irish Academy in 2022, for her remarks. Enjoy the day, agus gorf míle maith agaibh go léir.
Thank you, President, and good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be here this morning to mark this collaboration, this ongoing collaboration between the Heritage Council and the Royal Irish Academy, and in particular the Irish Historic Towns Atlas series. It's a really important piece of work which the Academy has undertaken, and those of us who spend most of our working and private lives outside the centre of Dublin really appreciate the fact that it incorporates so many places, both large and small, across Ireland, whose history is rich and requires and deserves celebration. So we acknowledge the excellent work and the initiative by the Royal Irish Academy in developing and continuing to advance this important series of publications. Indeed, the quality of the scholarship remains remarkably high, and I must commend the editorial team under the leadership of Sarah and her colleagues Jennifer and others within the Academy for their excellence in continuing to pursue a really high standard of work. As Pat has mentioned, the Heritage Council is proud to work with local authorities across the country to deliver the Irish Walled Towns Network, which is one of our key strategic programmes. And the objective of this programme is to celebrate those towns and cities within Ireland which have a history of being walled towns. And of course, as we're based in Kilkenny, which in itself has some remnants of its wall just down the road from our street or from our offices in Irishtown, it's no big surprise really that we appreciate and recognise the importance of walled towns and their history. And as all of you in the room know much better than I, because there are so many eminent experts on the history of walled towns, it's not unique to Ireland, of course. It was a feature of European development over many centuries, was the creation of walled towns. The goal of the Walled Town Network is, as I said, to preserve the history and mark the importance and bring attention to the importance of these walled towns. But we also coordinate with colleagues across Europe and indeed across Ireland, and including colleagues in Northern Ireland, to ensure that we have common objectives, and that sense of collaboration supports us in developing a deeper understanding of the importance of these towns. There is significant overlap between the work of the Historic Towns Atlas series and our work with the Walled Towns. 16 of the 31 published books are members of the Irish Walled Towns Network, plus 4 member towns are atlases which are in progress. Those towns which have been marked by the publication series include Athlone, Bandon, Carlingford, Carrickfergus, Cork, as mentioned by the President, Derry, Drogheda, Dublin, Feathered, which I know is close to the President's heart, Galway, Kells, Kildare, Kilkenny, which we all celebrate, and Limerick, Trim and Youghal. And Sarah tells me that Cashel, Clonmel, New Ross and Waterford are all in the works. Both the Irish Historic Towns Atlas and the Irish Walled Towns Network have an All-Ireland remit, and we had a meeting yesterday in our own building in Kilkenny with colleagues from the Local Authority Network in Northern Ireland, chief executives of the local authorities, and we at the Heritage Council are working hard to continue to grow our collaborations across the whole island of Ireland and to support work that we're doing in Derry and Carrickfergus on the walled towns and the history of those places. The theme of today's conference is around water, and as the President said, water is very close to our hearts, particularly yesterday, if you drove from Cork to Dublin as I did. And I had a very strong relationship with water all day yesterday, but it is fundamental to the development of our towns and cities. Water and all its features and expressions as wells, rivers, lakes and oceans sit at the intersection of our natural, built, tangible and intangible heritage. These bodies of water are also central to our connection with place and are increasingly becoming vehicles for community stewardship of place in locations all over Ireland. And it's something that we are finding an increasing interest in the celebration of water through the many applications that we see in our variety of grant schemes, whereby communities are increasingly concerned about the protection of the resource, that be it a local river or ponds or lakes, and wish to ensure the protection and the history of water in their place. As part of this seminar programs, we'll be hearing from a number of speakers on topics ranging from Ireland's Viking Age towns to Eel Weirs in Athlone, to John Rock's Cork, and to climate action in Ballina. And this is something which we really wish to ensure that we highlight. Our current work in the Heritage Council is very much focusing on the impact on climate, on natural heritage and our built environment. As some of you may have seen a feature article in last Sunday's Sunday Times around research that we are progressing around the impact of heritage of climate change on heritage and potential steps that may be taken to acknowledge the changes to our environment because of the changes in climate, and how we might record what has been there before it is lost. It's a school of heritage practice which is increasingly growing, and it has the apt but somewhat poignant title of palliative heritage. But that's not for today. This collaboration here today is a really important collaboration between us and the Academy. I'm always glad to be here. And as the President said, I was very honoured to be elected a member of the Academy, but equally on an organisational level, we value very much our colleagues here in Academy House. We hope that today's seminar will be enlightening and will be the first of many more important discourses around the significance of place in Ireland, and in particular those towns which are walled. So I hope you have a good day, enjoy your speakers, and hopefully see you again in another year. Gurd míle maith agat.
Everyone, thank you, Virginia. Thank you, President. My name is Emer O'Connell. I coordinate the Irish Walled Towns Network for the Heritage Council. I'm going to move swiftly into our first session today because we are quite tight for time, and one of my jobs will be keeping the speakers on time. Somebody has to be first, and that person today is Dr. Edward Pollard. Dr. Pollard is a research archaeologist with the Discovery Programme, working on the Cherish project, which is an Ireland-Wales project that focuses on coastal heritage sites which are at risk due to climate change. And Dr. Pollard is going to talk to us about Clonmines, an Anglo-Norman estuary town in County Wexford.
Hello everyone. Thank you for letting me talk here today. Yeah. So this, well, we originally worked for the Cherish project, the Climate Heritage Environment Reefs and Islands. We're looking at how climate change is affecting our heritage, and for the with the EU funded project, we finished a couple of years ago. So this was good to get one of our sites that we looked at here in more of an estuarine environment, and we're combining it with Arnaud and Paul, and because they previously worked at Clonmines like a few years before we started. So we're hoping to work together in the future. So just some of the methodology. You'll see some of the aerial pictures that we were taking as we were going around these sites from the aerial reconnaissance. This led on to determining what sites we were going to look at, and we did some coastal surveys, how much erosion is along the coast, and we do some geophysics. We didn't get to actually do geophysical survey and magnetometer survey at Clonmines because of COVID, but Paul and Arnaud had previously done this. So there was. We did some laser scanning of the buildings. They're getting overgrown with the with vegetation growth, and we kind of a lot of the aerial images from the drone we can all put together to form a photogrammetry and maps of the sites that we were taking. And the university, our partners over in Wales, as part of the project, did some paleo-environmental coring to kind of in the river to kind of date some of these areas. Okay, so just showing you, this is the Murdoch-Mackenzie map for the chart from about the late 18th century. So you can just see the area of Clonmines, the bay. Clonmines is right at the head of that estuary. It's mostly intertidal. You can see it's all dotted in the area. It's about 7 kilometres of a river to go up to where the town actually is. And you see also in that area, there's other medieval places like Tintern, and you can see that you've got Hook Head, and it was in the bay, almost kind of narrowed in by the Salty Islands and Hook Head. So when you have some of the aerial pictures here, I'll try and take you through the through the entrance to Bannow Bay. Where you got Bannow Island. I wanted to show, because that's another deserted medieval town that's just at the mouth of this. It's also important with the Anglo-Norman arrival here, and so which has been deserted just at the entrance to Bannow Bay. And you see there's lots of sandbars, and they're constantly changing, at least to get the boats up the river towards Clonmines. The UK Hydrographic Office chart from about the 1850s. Here you can see that they got about 400 meters gap at this entrance at low tide. There's about depths about maybe about 1 meter to 3 meters of water, but that would be the banks, and that'll be wavy banks. So you really, to get your boat up at low tide, you need to go in with the higher tide. The first anchorage really is only marked so actually when you're in the river beside Bannow Island. And going up to the head where Clonmines is, the chart, they kind of copied the first edition, but the depths are still there. But even the boats didn't record much more depths close to the town itself. It's located. Here's some of the aerial images. You can see just where the rivers kind of meet there, just before the town itself. The Augustinian Friary, you can just see there. At the corner, that's one of the reasons we actually were there, was because of that was starting to flood, and the local farmer kind of says it would be good to know what is happening here. There's at least 3 churches within the site itself. 2 tower houses. One of the tower houses, the Sutton Tower House, is still lived in today by the family that owns the land. And but then you've also got the Fitzhenry Tower House as well, closer to us here. There's not really a walled town as much. Most that kind of bounds the town there. You can see the boundary of that hedge line going across there. And I think it's important to point out where that levee dike area is there at the front, because that's all reclaimed land. And something like the Down survey does kind of show kind of a dotted line along this area here, but probably still was farmed, so it could have been drained for quite a while. But that's certainly kind of altered parts of the river as well, and that does, they do have to keep repairing that wall, so how much has changed. But really to point out that this kind of area here, it really is like a spur going into the river of where the town is, kind of bounded by the Pill Creek and the river here. on that side. So the tradition is it was founded by William Marshall. He married Isabel de Clare in about 1189. The Augustinian friary was founded, meant to be founded around 1384. There's the resources as well as the farmland. There is records of fishing of the bass, the mullet, flounder, and salmon. There's a lot of oyster farms today. Mining, you can still see from the 19th century on the opposite side of the river. There's some Cornet engine houses remaining, and they were still, even though it probably was abandoned in the 17th century, there were still they were elected members of Parliament up to the Union. Oh yeah, so after the Reformation, you can see the Bourne area that was kind of included as part of the the church was included part of the Bourne, and yeah, the flooding there was coming into at the start of the church project into the friary there. Just showing a bit of the topography, you can see that sloping using the digital elevation model on the left of the town. So that's the red line goes over the hedge, the outer wall, and goes down across the Black Castle, the Fitzhenry Castle, down to the shore. So it slopes down from 15 meters down to the salt marshes on the around the river area. A lot of the aerial flying wasn't done on, I suppose it was done more of erosion, but when we actually did the photogrammetry, and it was in a much more drier area, drier conditions, and you can actually see parts of where the old monastery used to be in that area, which also comes up in previous geophysics. You can just see there's lighter patches in the grass, what you could probably identify as part of the cloister buildings and surrounding buildings. Top right, you can see the geophysical survey, the magnetometer survey that Paul and Arnaud did, and you can see it's very busy. There seems to be lots of roads and plots of land, and so there seems to be a lot remaining within this area. That's the Abbey Field just to the north of the church there. In the middle there, you can see the University of Aberystwyth doing some coring. We did some coring in several places along the salt marshes there, like in front of the church. We did get a depth of, if you find some shell layers, you can date that. And the coring, you can see it's about 1.55 meters depth. So you can see, at least the water level on the silt level is lower. So allowing boats come a lot closer to the town itself around that time. So as well as the kind of siltation that you're getting, we're also getting some erosion just to the south of the town itself. Is the Pill Field, and so this is actually seems to be outside the that boundary I was telling you about, and just to the south, so south of the farmhouse, and here you can see there's a slate horizon that top left, also pieces of pottery eroding out, and that's I kind of find along that foreshore on the top right there. Arnaud and Paul did collect some place names, see around this area. So the Pill Field named after the wee creek that is just to the left of it. So there's just examples of the artifacts we're finding on the foreshore that are eroding along there. So you can see some of the medieval pottery, bits of the slate, and with holes in it. So we would be either for roofing or it's for weighing down thatch roofs. And also some slag as well. We didn't think it was from lead. From there's lead and silver mines from across. We did try that, test that, but it does seem to be iron slag in that kind of area to the south of the settlement. And you can see there's also buildings eroding out from that area as well. You can see here and just compare it to when we were able to come back again in 3 years later. You can see that's further eroding back. This is just part of the river because we were told the stepping stone, badly spelt there, but you could see the local farmer did say you could step onto that stone mound roughly several generations back. So it's about about 120 years ago. So you can actually see how much erosion. And actually, when we did the photogrammetry, you can see on the left there, it looked like a stone mound as if it was a perhaps boat shaped, but with ballast from a boat, I was hoping. But I think more it might have been to kind of marking maybe the way into the harbour itself of the infrastructure, which I'm kind of showing you here. that you can see from the right building, there's at least a quay and a pier. I believe the pier there probably seems to be associated with so we say the walled garden. That's probably might be 19th century. So we had a slight argument of whether that quay is. I'm thinking it's quite early because it doesn't seem to be any access through the walled garden, so it seems to be more eroding out. So that's why I'm kind of, and if you see a few more pictures of it here, you can see the high tide and spring tides go above it. There's salt marsh, so as if it is being eroded out. So I'm thinking, and is it also associated with the Sutton Tower House? You can see in the farm building behind there in the top right. Here. Similarly, Paul identified another pier, quay associated with the Fitzhenry Castle, just where the salt marsh has grown in that area. And so we did kind of put some coring down in that area as well. You can see some of the stonework here, around here. And so that was about like 2 meters depth. I think it's so at least before the town was started, the sediment was lower and has been building up over the time there. Just really talk about like the ferry and the ford across there. You can see in the down survey on the left there, there's Bannow Bay ferry and there's Clonmines ferry at the head of certainly there's a ford marked on the Valentine Gill map in the early 19th century, but that moved like a kilometre further south of where Clonmines was. So I think Clonmines is probably it wasn't really in use at that time, so the ford had moved south. And you can see the ford from the aerial pictures. And looking across there at the bottom left, that's from the Augustinian Friary side, and you can see it's kind of marked by stakes. And in the distance, there's the ford itself. And so there's like this crossing, almost like it's been worn through there. Well, sort of when I was walking on it, you can see there's bigger stones here and lighter stones there. So it seems to have been redone at different phases. Yeah. So I'll just summarize there. Just saying that this geophysics and photogrammetry is showing that there is a lot in this area of the town. So as well as the silting that's been occurring and possibly leading to not being much use today, but there's also the erosion is occurring as well. So a lot of material is being exposed. And yeah, particularly interested in the ford. I suppose it was a deserted town that would eventually have turned into a bridge, but we can see it's still remaining today as that. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much. A fascinating glimpse into what I'm sure is a much more detailed story of Clonmines, which we'd love to hear another day. So our next speaker is Dr. Aengus Ó Fionnagáin. Dr. Ó Fionnagáin is a lecturer in Irish at the University of Limerick. He focuses on place names and townland names, among other areas. And he is going to talk to us about weirs in Athlone and their names. Thank you.
Much. Everybody hear me? Yeah, okay. So hopefully people have a handout. There's some more there. If anybody didn't get one, you can get it at the end. So weirs in Athlone and their names. So weirs are perhaps something not everybody is familiar with. So what you see here is one of the fabulous plans produced by the Shannon Commissioners in the 1830s. This is from Banagher. So people should get the idea fairly clear there what's involved. It's a trap, essentially a V with a net at the outlet, where the fish could be caught. So in this case, there's stone weirs. My pointer will work. In Athlone, it seems there were mostly posts with a wicker frame, which I think was the more common structure. So my background is in Irish language studies and place names. So what I've been looking is not so much about the industry or the economic aspect of it, but the names themselves and what we can understand from the names. So the key sources, 4 to 5 key sources. We have very important document from the early 17th century, where all the weirs were granted to the kind of notable merchants and landowning families in the town. Another grant later on in the 17th century, registry of deeds then in the 18th and 19th century, and then finally the Shannon Commissioners sort of report, you could call it, from, or documents anyway, from May 1838, when all of the weirs were, the weir owners and tenants were compensated prior to the weirs being removed to facilitate dredging, navigation works, a new bridge in the river, and so on. A total change in what had been the landscape of the town for probably, well, 6-7 centuries before that. And the US 6-inch then around the same time also gives us some good information. So this is an example of the documents we have from the Shannon Commissioners. So you get the names of the eel weir there. Eel weir number 9 called Middle Bridge Weir or Coruna. Eel weir Corra Friora alias Friol. So some of them can be quite obscure and difficult to make out, but when we look at the earlier evidence, often we have a good idea of what the names mean. So there are documents for towns and settlements, the whole end of the Shannon, in the Shannon Commissioners Archive, a lot of which has been digitized. I just came across it by accident when I was preparing this talk. And I believe there's more that hasn't been digitized. So for anybody interested, for a whole range of reasons and areas, it's something well worth looking at. There's references to a plan, but I haven't been able to find the plan, but I've been in touch with the archivist and there is more and they're going to have a look. So if the plan turns up, that would be great. So we have the OS maps there. So you can see the eel weirs. This is the town here. This is the old bridge. So the eel weirs are these kind of angular shapes all the way up the river. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of them. I think over 30 net points, we'll say. Sometimes the names refer to a series of weirs, sometimes to an individual weir. It's a bit difficult to be definitive about counting them and so on. And of course, we're talking about structures that were probably continuously rebuilt over centuries. You know, so it's a bit like the brush and only fools and horses, you know. At what point is it a new structure entirely? The names sometimes would have changed, although there's a lot of continuity. So it's a bit difficult to say exactly how many we're talking about, but consistently you're somewhere between 20 and 30 anyway from the names. So this is an example of 17th century grant. So you see the names here. So weirs in the Shannon called Corna Clough, so that'd be Corna Clough, so the weir of the stone, Corna Lac, so the weir of the flat stone, and so on. Cornassa, so the weir of the fall. There was a very significant fall at the ford, which gave the town its name, Athlone, at the site of the bridge. So they're very topographical. They tell us a lot about the past topography of the town before this massive change the Shannon Commissioners carried out in the 18th, 19th century. So I think that's very, very valuable. You're getting a whole topographical picture of the river. Now, there has been some work done on this before. A.J. Wendt has written extensively about fisheries all over Ireland. And he says about the weirs in Athlone, the names of the weirs are interesting, even though it is not now possible to identify them or their situation. So I think probably I'll be able to do something about that, but maybe not answer all the questions. Certainly, if I can get more out of the Shannon Commissioners Archive, I may be able. So we have this beautiful monochrome wash from 1820, Colonel Charles Pratt at Athlone, 1820. And you see the full picture there. You've got the boxes for storing the fish on the shore. If you can make out, that's a weir there. If you can just see the poles sticking up. Another one down here at the bridge. And you've all these boats going to and forth. You've got nets drying there on the shore. And every image of early 19th century Athlone features fishing prominently. This one I've taken from the Atlas, the IHTA Atlas, and it's maybe a little bit clearer. You've got nets there again, nets here, and you can see that this weir is called lyre bilk. Lyre bilk. No, lyre is the space between your fingers. So it's literally the shape, the typical shape. So it's the small fork, and that one is very close to the castle and is an important one. It's mentioned very frequently from an early date. So massive economic resource. And when the weirs were removed in the 1830s, the compensation paid out was very substantial, £300 to £400 per weir, which if you were to do a purchasing comparison would be quite a lot of money. I couldn't say exactly, but I think you're talking hundreds of thousands to kind of millions in comparison for some of the bigger weirs anyway. And there's great accounts of there's one from 1840, fishing guide, Angler's Guide to Ireland, and the author's guide, I think, was a Kerryman, and he was absolutely horrified at the sight of eels in, as he said, every shop and whiskey shack in Athlone, snakes as long as your arm with onions in their mouths. And it, to him, was totally foreign, this idea of eating eels, but it seemed to be major foodstuff in the town at that time. Okay, so I better get on to the names, which is really maybe where I add a little bit of value. So there are three big categories. Topographic names, so named after some distinguishing feature of the weir. Second most numerous category are names after the owners or the builders. And the third category then would be the least numerous, would be weirs which are named after a nearby landmark, which is, you know, an obvious motivation for naming. If you have to go out every day from a particular point on the bank of the river, it might take the name of that point. You get half translations like Corda Edmund. So Edmund is probably sort of a translation or anglicisation of Eamon. We'll come to that in a minute. Some of the very transparent Irish names have an English alias. So something like Cordon Mool would be very readily understood. So, you know, they've included the new weir. But they're all Irish names on down to the later sources, the 19th century sources. We get some English names coming in. Some of the Irish names are not that transparent, like Corboyne here. I can't make that out. The first part is Corra, which is the Irish for weir, and that's the common generic in all of the names. And then you get very transparent English names like John Healy's Weir, and we know that was only built 10 or 20 years before it was removed in the 1830s, and the man was still alive. He was compensated at the time. Some of the English names are not so transparent, like the Triambles. I can't make that out, and there's a little triamble and a big triamble, and I think it may be a trammel. A trammel net is a net with 3 layers, which was commonly used in fishing all over Ireland at that time, estuary fishing and so on. So trammel has become tramble maybe, or something like that, and then the spelling triamble, reflecting the fact that it's a 3-layered net, but I don't know. So just conscious of time and to look at one name in a little bit more detail, and then I'll run through the handout. So I think this is a particularly interesting one. Cordon Tudra, I think the president of the Academy mentioned the train. If you come up on the Cork line, you'll go through Portarlington, Coolan Tudra, so the corner of the Tanner, Sudra. And this one, when I looked at it first, seemed quite obscure. I had all sorts of different ideas as to what it meant. Carton Tudor, Carton Saudra, you know, but looking at the actual patent, it was granted to Thomas Rochfort, a merchant in the town, or a tanner in the town, and also a merchant. And it's pretty clear this is what we're dealing with. So Corda an Tudor, granted to Thomas Rochfort, tanner, in 1619. So the name is probably contemporary with Thomas Rochfort. So this is a name probably coined in the early 1600s. Or possibly built by Rochfort himself. So the linguistic evidence is primary, and then the contextual evidence can be very important, complementary layer. So just before we go on to that slide, I might have a quick run through the handout if people have it there. So the vast majority, the generic element is Corda ord and Corda deag and Corda cord. So the round weir on Corda boards, big weir. We have 2 on Corda Nuas, one above the bridge, one below the bridge. On Grínan Deag, the sunny spot, I'm taking that to be a place on the bank of the river, you know, where the weir was accessed and so on. And you've been Grínan lower as well. On Lyre Deag, we already mentioned, near the bridge and near the castle. Codda and Dá Cúile, particularly like this one, you know, the weir of the two posts. And when you look at the historical spellings, which I've just given you a sample, it's pretty clear. That's what we're talking about here, Codda Nyasa. So I think the memory of the falls in Athlone is pretty much gone in the town now because the Shannon commissioners altered it so much. But if you look at historical accounts, what struck people most when they crossed the Shannon and Athlone was the power of the water over that fall. And in the documents talking about the compensation for the removal of the weirs, they talk about a lot of the smaller fish being injured by the fall, by the power of the water. So there's a lot of information in even one name, even if it's only 2 words. It can tell us a lot about the kind of past topography of the area. Codda na Cluiche, number 16, the stone. Codda na Guiry, some of them it's difficult to be sure. So Cuivrach is possibly an Irish word for trammel net. Again, the forms are a little bit, you know, indistinct and difficult to be certain. Codda Húteach, we only have that from the early 19th century, possibly, you know, Súteach, disturbed or agitated water, maybe, you know, at the base of the falls. I'm not entirely certain about that one. Codda Uine, again, there's only one form on record. Now, moving on to the ones, I think the most interesting names, those that relate to their owner or builder. So Codda and Wards, so probably the Mac Wards family, of which there were 4 in the town in the 17th century. Codda and Frioda, these are probably the oldest weirs, going back to the 13th century, to the Cluniac foundation in the town. The prior would have held those until the 1540s. Codda and Tudra, we've already talked about. And then we have these ones, Codda Anchor. So John Anchors was the vicar of Athlone, 1608, 1629. So again, we can date that name probably to his lifetime, or maybe, you know, 1 or 2 generations before. Codda Carbra. Carbra would be a very prominent personal name among the O'Brien family, who were the Gaelic lords of Brawley, which would be the land surrounding the town. Cormac, very common personal name among the O'Briens again. So you get this mix of the Gaelic Irish, the New English, and as you see, the Old English as well. Codda Eamon. This is almost certain a reference to Eamon Ó Fionnagáin, who was the leading merchant in the town in the late 16th century, early 17th century. He was granted a weir at the bridge in 1570 and also a right to build a mill there. Codda Henry Aubrey. So Henry Aubrey's weir. Aubrey, a merchant of New English origin in the town. Codda Henry Jones. And the form is Henry, not Henri, which would be the more common one, but it's a biform of Henry. It's Henry in Irish. And the Joneses would be among the most prominent of the Old English Catholic landowners in and around the town. So they're all represented. Codda Wadish or Codda Icuna, so the Morris's weir, or the weir of the O'Cooney. Codda Misset. I've only got one form. I'm not certain. Is this a reference to the Misset family, which is an Anglo-Norman surname? But there was a Janet Misset in the town in 1619, so it's possible. Okay, Codda Una, the weir of Una, only in one form, so can't be certain. And then we have a few of the English names, like the crank weirs, maybe some kind of mechanism for raising the net, and so on. My Drum is a transferred name. That was the seat of Lord Castlemaine, who was one of the main landowners in town. Okay, so to sum up, what's important about this, I think it tells us a lot about the past topography of the town. It tells us how important economically this was to life down, but also, you know, from a naturalistic point of view, just, you know, how strong the fishery was, how many eels there were. They took other fish as well, not just eels. One of the most interesting things, I think, is the linguistic aspect of it, that you can say by looking at those names that the main language of the town of Athlone in the early 17th century was Irish, because the names are formed in Irish regardless of the owner's background, ethnic background, be it New English, Old English, or Gaelic Irish. In all cases, the names are Irish, even if they incorporate names, you know, which have come in from outside. And I think that's probably an underappreciated point, and, you know, adds to our understanding of town life in a walled town at that time. So you would have people of all different backgrounds, but I think the main language of communication of business was clearly Irish, because these were important economic units and their names were their identifiers. And that continued down through the legal documents over the centuries. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think a really good example of how the history of our towns is so much more than the physical streets and buildings that survive. It's everything altogether, the linguistics, the economics, the social history. And it's a really lovely example of that. Our next speaker is Dr. Philip Crowe. Dr. Crowe is Director of Research in UCD's School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy and co-director of the UCD Centre for Irish Towns. And Philip is going to talk to us about some work that he has been involved with in Ballina.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Maybe before I start, some of you are probably wondering what on earth is the UCD Centre for Irish Towns. So just to explain, it's a transdisciplinary centre for research and training in the university. We're not funded, so what we do is we get funding for research projects. And what I'm going to do today is to introduce you to one of those funded projects that we're working on called Cascade, and it's in Ballina. And it is, as it says in the slide, connecting communities to climate change down the historic laneways of Ballina. Now, historic laneways may seem like a slightly unusual place to connect with climate change, but hopefully that will make some sense by the end of the presentation. But before we arrive in Ballina, I want to just position the project in a wider exploration that connects with some of the words that Virginia gave us earlier about how cultural heritage activation activities might support climate action in Irish towns. And I'm going to do that through another project, just very briefly, which is funded by Horizon Europe and aligned with the new European Bauhaus, which I'm sure everyone's pretty familiar with now, and it's called Heritact. And it's in 3 pilot locations. So it's one of these European projects where we have partners all over Europe. And we have the 3 pilot locations are described by our Greek and Italian partners as Elefsina, which is one of the major archaeological sites in Greece, then Milano, which is the largest city in Italy, and then Ballina, which is a very small town in the west of Ireland. And we have tried to coach our partners as to the pronunciation, and we have totally given up. It's stuck. And some of you may argue that it sounds a little bit better. Anyway, at the start of this project, we did a semi-systematic review of literature to try and understand the state of the art in how cultural heritage activation, which could mean simply engagement or interpretation or the reuse of, say, heritage buildings or artifacts or ideas, relates to climate action. We summarized these into 5 themes. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of them, and 4 sub-themes under each of the 5 themes. And I'm just going to try and illustrate 3 of them through the Cascade project. So the first one being that cultural heritage activation can be a catalyst for action. And there's no better project to demonstrate that than the Cherish project that Edward was mentioning earlier, has been involved with, because the loss or potential loss of cultural and urban heritage can be one of the most obvious and visible impacts of climate change. And then the third one I'm going to look at, so I should be highlighting them. The third one is a contributor to community resilience, because cultural heritage, if it's activated, is part of what makes places unique and valued, and therefore supports functioning communities that can respond to rapidly changing circumstances. And then the 5th one, a driver of cultural change, because cultural heritage, as we all know, can be understood as a repository of values, ideas, and ways of living together on this planet, with huge potential to provide insights into how we might do things differently today and in the future. So just coming to Cascade, which is the subject of this paper, it's funded by Creative Ireland, the Climate Action Fund 2. It's a collaboration between UCD academics from architecture and engineering, a former councillor from Mayo County Council, Mark Duffy, who's now a senator, an artist Rianach Ní Nail, who's based in Galway, and a local architecture practice in Ballina called Accelerating Change Together. And as I say, it's located in Ballina, County Mayo, and we're wrapping up at the end of the year. And it's very much an applied research project. So with this project, we dive immediately into some cultural heritage in the form of ideas, in this case, from the Scottish polymath Patrick Geddes. And anybody that knows me, you know I'm totally incapable of giving a talk without talking about Patrick Geddes. His dates are 1854 to 1932. And Geddes crucially recognized that you needed to bring everyone along in processes of change. In his case, it was to address the industrial city that he found, which is incredibly unhealthy and unequal. And that to do this, everyone needed to first understand the problems or the reasons the change is needed. So he recognized also that people don't often see or register the problems. We can be half blind to them. And so he suggested, as a first step, engaging citizens with local geographical knowledge, which may sound a little bit bland, but he wanted to do this through activities, and he was pretty much obsessed by mapping. So he's an incredibly appropriate person for today. So Geddes believed that by understanding the local, it would be possible, using systems thinking effectively, to comprehend the global and therefore make your local actions relevant. And he coined the environmental mantra, think global, act local. And just to quickly illustrate this is a map from 1908 of Edinburgh, the old town in Edinburgh, where Geddes and a group of middle-class Edwardian ladies engaged in an interactive and inclusive process of identifying underused spaces. And this activity prompted them to address the urban challenges that they now understood better through their activity of mapping. And in this case, they created gardens for children. And there are interesting parallels. There's a reason why I'm showing this. There are parallels here with the current discourse and what is called the knowledge action gap, which is where people, and I would include myself in this, have a good awareness and understanding of climate change. They may even have a degree or a PhD in it. And they have great concerns in relation to climate change, but the necessary changes are not made. We don't act on it. And so there's a general consensus that the knowledge action gap can be solved partly by engaging communities in activities, actually doing stuff that are manageable and local, and from which they can see positive impacts from their efforts. So these ideas are explored in this Cascade project in Ballina, and it has two starting points. First of which is that many of the impacts of climate change in this country are linked with water, as we've discussed already. And we're going to get more rainfall, but crucially greater rainfall intensity in the winters, and we'll get less rainfall in the summers. And this is a graph from Met Éireann. And the second starting point then is the laneways in our heritage towns and cities are a key part of them, key part of the urban fabric, the urban morphology, and they're very often in a poor state of repair. And that is very often due to poor water management. From a lack of maintenance, perhaps, or poor state of repair of the rainwater goods. So the Cascade project brings these two things together, water and laneways, in Ballina. And the basic idea is that we can start to engage citizens with climate change by exploring one aspect of water, the one aspect, which is water, at a local and tangible scale in places they inhabit and experience daily, through an engaged and activity-based approach that is focused on two main things: an understanding of how water, how key water is to the past, present, and possible of these places, and the adaptation and transformation of these laneways to cope with climate change impacts. And these slides just give you an idea of the state of the laneways in Ballina. I would predict not much different to laneways in many other towns. So why is Ballina so suitable for this project? There's no Irish historic town atlas for Ballina, and there's no town wall, so it's thoroughly neglected. But the most obvious reason is that Ballina has a very strong connection with water, and it's literally, in Ballina, it's coming at you from all angles all of the time. And perhaps most importantly is that Ballina is at the very center of an absolutely vast watershed, and it sits astride the River Moy, which is a very powerful river, and at a key point in the River Moy, it's at the intersection of the riverine and marine ecosystems. And used to find salmon literally bursting out of this river. They literally leap out of it. We've all seen those pictures, and it fueled this booming fishing industry in the past. So just to look at the 1893-97 maps. I'm going to have 3 screenshots here. I won't go into any detail. The point is, the 3 screenshots go downriver, that we can see lots of evidence of industries that are based on the water and based on this incredible kinetic energy running through the town. So the blue circles, we could argue is that blue or green, I suppose, are to do with fishing and to do with the ridge pools and the fish traps. And there's a stretch between the 2 bridges where people literally just scooped the fish out. There were also, there was a brewery that's shown in the 1935 map, but there's many mills, etc. And there's also the Ballina Mineral Water Company, that's the yellow one. And as we go towards the river, there's more mills and there's more quays and infrastructure for fishing. And then we get to the actual quay, which is still there today. And then there's also the ice house, which is on the bottom of the slide there. There's just a couple of images there to show you. So on the left, that's the ridge pool and the weir. And on the right, the ice house, which is now a boutique hotel, which you can sit out in a bath looking over the Moy, and steam rises, and I imagine it's rather cold. So in the present day, the prosperity of the town has declined in parallel with salmon stocks, and today the relationship with water is perhaps not quite as positive, and it's represented by things like vacant buildings. And the one on the left is Hugh Ruddy & Co, which was the Ballina Mineral Water Company. Redundant infrastructure on the right, that's the old fish traps, and flooding, obviously. So coming back to the Cascade project, where we were trying to engage people with the past, present, and possible of water in their town, it had numerous stages, and the first one is what we call the co-production of knowledge stage, which is recognizing that local people know their place and systems best. And we did this through various means. The first one on the right there is Laneway tours, which had a curated umbrella collection, as you can see, and we were just communicating the history of water in the town to anybody that wanted to come along. And we had story mapping workshops, which obviously means lots of stickers and lots of post-its, where people shared stories and experiences and insights. And we had survey drawing sessions, and so that really helped people observe connections between water and the urban environment, how water literally cascades down buildings in a very chaotic fashion, and forms puddles, soaks into surrounding materials, and creates a perfect habitat for ferns and moss. So the lanes in Ballina are verdant, to say the least. And we also had a questionnaire, which included questions on climate action, what areas of the town needed improvement. And these were all ultimately trying to understand the relationship between people, place, and water. And we then displayed the findings back to people digitally and physically in the laneways with these posters, with these maps. And then we moved on to a second stage, which was called a co-design stage, where we gathered ideas that might respond to the issues that have been raised in stage 1. And we translated these into sketches. These are just a small sample. And so there are all sorts of things like urban pocket forests or sensory rain chains, or this little doggy park, which is very on the mark at the moment from the garden in Chelsea I observed the other day. And then these were all voted on online and in workshops. The most popular were then developed in further workshops with people from the local authority, different stakeholders, and with school children. There's an image in the middle there, me talking to some teenagers from Moyne College, and I think the heating wasn't working in the Mary Robinson Centre, so it's rather cold. And so we're now in a stage where we're going to develop one of the ideas and actually implement it, which is quite unusual for a research project, in one of the lanes, and that's going to happen over the summer. And after that, we'll do a co-evaluation process, and we use a technique called ripple effect mapping. And this on the slide is just part of a previous ripple effect mapping that we did on a project called Ripple, which was where we basically built a garden, a rain garden, with the community in the town. And so it's an interesting form of evaluation where the community tells you how it affected them, what was the impact for them. So to wrap up, if we go back to the 5 themes highlighted in orange, the project explores cultural heritage activation of the laneways in Ballina as a catalyst for action, communicating the impacts of climate change at a local scale in a heritage context. It's a contributor to community resilience, we hope. People have been sharing memories and knowledge of the historic laneways, and therefore contribute to a sense of place and belonging, and attachment to place, and that helps and it has helped communities anticipate change and exercise their imaginations as to how things could be transformed. And it's also been a driver of cultural change, revisiting past theories and practice from Geddes, but also demonstrating or reminding people of a past where we were much closer to living within the renewable and assimilative capacities of our region. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. I'm really struck by the idea of heritage activation as climate action, and I think it's something that we could, within the network, we could develop as well. So our next speaker is Dr. Marc Caball. Dr. Caball is a cultural historian in UCD whose primary research interests are early modern Ireland, the history of the early modern British Atlantic, and the history of the book. And Dr. Caball is going to speak to us about the sea and the emergence of modern Tralee.
Thank you. So I want to, in the space allocated to me, the time allocated, talk about Tralee. Tralee isn't generally associated with the sea or with water, but Tralee has not one river, it has 3 rivers. And it is adjacent to Tralee Bay, it's adjacent to the ocean and Tralee, the strand of the Lee. So I want to try and maybe explore the significance of water and of maritime commerce to the development of Tralee. So I'm going to have to go back to the Norman period. The Normans don't seem to be terribly popular these days, but they did found Tralee amongst other places. So we know that, like other towns like Youghal, for instance, or Sligo, a Dominican priory was kind of the centerpiece, and that had access to the River Gyle. It's called the Big River today, and smaller boats could come up that river from the bay, and that underpinned trade. Apparently, there was a wooden quay which allowed access to the priory. So where you have Stoughton's Road today, which I think dates from about 1800, you would have had the quay, and behind the road there, you would have had the abbey. The road there covers a river. So Tralee literally is built on water. And there's not one river there, there's a river called the Balloonic River flowing in to the Big River. That was called the quay. It's covered over in the, it was called the canal. It's covered over in the 1840s. It gets a bit confusing because there are 2 canals, but this is the earlier canal. We know that there was trade. The record, the historical record is quite fragmentary, but we know from occasional pieces of evidence that Tralee and Dingle, they're lumped together in terms of customs, were involved in the wine trade in the early 17th century. We know a bit about exports in the early 1620s from Tralee and Dingle. Stuff like timber, so timber which must have been cut down in South Kerry, I assume. There was a thriving industry in pilchards in Munster in the 17th and into the early 18th century. There were small herring-like fish. And pipe staves. Pipe staves are used to manufacture casks. The picture gets a bit more cloudy towards the end of, from about 1640 onwards and towards the end of the 17th century. I assume that the impact of 1642 and the Williamite Wars had a negative effect on the town's commerce. And there doesn't seem to have been any great trade in the 18th century. Charles Smith, who wrote a series of county histories, he was a Dungarvan apothecary, visited Tralee in the early 1750s, where he was hosted by the Denny family. The Denny family had been granted Tralee in the 16th century. Not the most industrious family, I have to say, a bunch of settlers, but nonetheless, not especially malignant either. He says this town is about a mile from the sea, which it is to this day. And he talks about vessels coming up, but there isn't much trade at this point, he seems to suggest. The markets are all well supplied, and there are considerable quantities of fine herrings are taken in Tralee Bay. So Tralee basically is a county town. It's where the assizes are held. It's where elections are held. It has the assembly room. So it's the social hub for the Anglo-Irish elite in County Kerry. But the Anglo-Irish elite County Kerry are actually quite closely intermarried with the old Gaelic elite. So it's a very interesting society in Irish which have been spoken on the streets. As Tralee in 1735. So it is the most unusual town in the sense that, the lower portion is the Denny garden, which is part of the town park today called the Green. It's a town dominated by a garden. You have the square, you have Castle Street, and you have the rivers flowing through the town at this point. They're covered up, they're covered over, arcaded later in the 18th century and the early 19th century. So it's a very watery place. We get occasional tantalizing hints about Tralee's maritime trade. For instance, there's a reference to something called the Royal George of Tralee, a ship, obviously, which had arrived in Dublin in 1740 from Rotterdam. We get stray references in the newspapers. A small sloop from Tralee laden with kelp, seaweed, was driven into Tramore Bay and went to pieces. But I would suggest Pache David Dixon, and he says there was a tendency towards port centralisation in southwest Munster. So basically Cork overtook the likes of Kinsale, Youghal, and competed afterwards with Limerick, Waterford and Dublin for cattle, butter, and butter is important to the story, pigs and the wool of the south. But things begin to pick up towards the end of the 18th century, and Blennerville, called after Sir Roland Blennerhassett, is developed as a port, as Tralee's quay. It's built on the site of an old hamlet called Coher y Voron. So dead centre is Blennerville Quay there, up from the windmill, and in the foreground is the later canal, which was opened in 1846. So it's quite an infrastructure put in place in the first 50 years of the 19th century. So that's the Tralee Ship Canal, looking rather melancholy on the day that I was there. But you have some sense of the majestic vista opening up there towards the Dingle Peninsula, Corcovina. Right. So butter, I think I want to say a few words about it. Butter becomes important in Kerry towards the end of the 18th century. Dixon tells from the 1760s, Kerry was becoming a major supplier of butter to the Cork butter market. And something happens then in the 1820s that I want to talk about, which I think underpins the emergence of Tralee as a substantial commercial mercantile centre. Now, the county is at a disadvantage in terms of trade. There's a memorial to the Lord Lieutenant in 1822, lamenting the fact that Kerry has no harbours, basically, and it's subservient to the provincial cities of Cork and Limerick. And they make the case for the erection of a pier within the Bay of Tralee, even though there is a quay wall at Blennerville. It goes on to say, make the case for Dingle, for the upgraded Dingle Harbour, navigation on the main Kenmare and Tarbert, and so on. So it just gives you some sense of how basic the logistical infrastructure was in Kerry. But things are beginning to happen, and again, we kind of have to look for these occasional tantalizing clues, suggestions, I suppose. A ship called the Recovery, en route from Tralee to London with a cargo of beef and butter, was lost off Yvra, South Kerry, in 1816. So a trade is beginning to pick up in the early 19th century. But a market for butter is put in place in 1824. And we're told that within a few months, a new trade has sprung up in Tralee. Butter, instead of being sent to Cork, is bought on the spot and exported. So butter would have been put in casks and put on the back of pack horses. And the journey to Cork City would have taken a few days. You would have had people coming from South Kerry, North Kerry, and so on. So it was quite an undertaking for farmers to go as far as Cork. So a market has been established in Tralee, and I think this transforms the fortunes of the town. And is very much, I think, responsible for the town we see today. So we're told there the Kingdom of Kerry feels the invigorating infusion through all its veins. I'm sure the Healy-Rays will have a second such infusion. So A parliamentary inquiry at London, Westminster in 1826 tells us, well, why did a trade in butter develop in Tralee? It developed because it was much nearer to South Kerry. And it took a lot less time. If you were to go to Cork, you had to spend 3 to 4 days on a return journey. So even in the present condition, we're talking about 1824 of the harbour of Tralee, the exports for the last year exceeded 100,000 barrels of corn, and since last May, the commencement of the butter trade in Tralee, 15,000 firkins as a container for butter have been shipped for the English markets. So I think there's a conjunction of circumstances here. People need to be fed in rapidly expanding British industrial cities. There is an economic recession after 1815, but nonetheless, the volume of agricultural exports from Ireland continued to increase following 1815. So the butter is being shipped from Blennerville Quay effectively. Now, Blennerville Quay is problematic because it's silting up, so it means that larger ships can come close to the quay wall. But by 1823, for instance, the value of exports from Tralee was £50,000. That is a huge amount of money for the period and is suggestive of a very rapid development of commercial activity. Thank you. All right, so for instance, I'm just taking a snapshot here. For instance, in 1825, within the week, no fewer than 18 trading vessels have arrived in Tralee, where lately the appearance of a single vessel was such a novelty that thousands eagerly sought to view it. Probably an exaggeration, but nonetheless a very effective, I suppose, description of how quickly things had changed. 1825 as well. And I've just taken these at random. There's a huge amount of stuff in local newspapers. 18 vessels at Tralee with corn and butter for London, Liverpool. So the expanding British cities. But also a new transatlantic trade is opening up, a trade in people. So migrants. So timber is imported into Tralee from Canada, basically, what we would call Canada today. And on the return trip, migrants from Tralee are migrated, I suppose. They emigrate across the Atlantic. And the first known instance of such emigration, organized emigration, is in 1825. So it's not just a British Isles trade. We're now looking at a transatlantic trade. So silting is problematic at Blennerville Quay, and there are various efforts to put in place a canal which would link the town of Tralee to Tralee Bay, we saw previously. And after many false starts, Tralee Ship Canal is opened in 1846. It has missed the age of steam, and it too silts up, so it can't take extremely large, it can't take new steamships basically. Its design was already antiquated by the time it was launched during the famine. So Fionnagáin Harbour, which is the port for Tralee today, is established in the 1880s, and the Tralee and Fionnagáin railway line was opened for passengers in 1887. So it's a very impressive local infrastructure. So I want to just finish up by saying, I'm giving you a bit of a busman's tour of Tralee's history. The 1820s, I think, is key to the development, the emergence of modern Tralee. The population increases. A bank is established in 1823. Denny Street, which is probably the last great Georgian street, I would argue, in Western Europe. A very grandiose courthouse that you see often on the news was opened in 1831. And it has a very vibrant civic culture, a very vibrant cultural scene. You have at any one time 3 newspapers, which I think is indicative of a space which is full of ideas, newcomers, full of circulation of and transmission of ideas, and a place where things are happening. And you could argue all of that is truncated or diminished by the tragedy of the 1840s. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you for that snapshot of Tralee, and some parallels, I think, with New Ross, which we're going to be hearing about later in terms of being a more inland port and the trade. So we have a few minutes now for questions. I'd like to ask our speakers if they wouldn't mind coming up to the table, and if anybody has any questions, make yourself known, and I believe there's a microphone circulating. Gentleman here. Microphone.
Well, thank you very much for all those wonderful papers. I'm a visitor in from Whitehorse, Yukon, but I do live in Neenah now. Fast question for Angus. Quickly, the weirs that we see on all of these maps look very permanent. Would they not have been a seasonal product?
I think there were particular seasons when the eels would be running, but the weirs themselves were kind of semi-permanent structures. There was maybe 2 or 3 key times of the year when there would be, a lot of fish taken. But it does seem there's from a compensation point of view, people are anxious to show that the weirs were there for a very long time. So some are 50, 60 years old. Others are described as there from time immemorial, probably being continuously repaired. So they're semi-permanent structures. And as I said, in other areas, you have stone-built fish traps, like at Banagher. So.
Anyone else?
With regard to Clonmines, we were told that there were 3 churches. Are we to understand that one of those was a parish church with parochial functions and the other 2 were monastic? Or what is the scene there, please, about the churches?
The churches that I know, I was thinking of the Augustinian friary as one of the churches there, and there is, I think the parish church just on the outside near where the wall is. But beside that, there's also the cowboy church, where it's meant to be like the local story is a farmhand built the church for his mum. It's also just in that one, so it's in that area. So that's the 3 churches I was thinking of.
Just a question about Ballina. I have fond memories as a kid coming home from primary school watching the guys catch salmon, and also I snuck into the ice at one stage and saw these giant lollipops. At least I thought they were that, but it was just ice being formed for the storage of salmon. But just want to ask about the survey involving laneways. It strikes me that indirectly you're measuring a progression of dereliction of buildings. So very often laneways are forgotten. Downpipes from roof drainage, and we know rainfall is getting heavier, that it accelerates dereliction. And I wonder if the local council is involved in maybe obtaining some of the information that you're gleaning with the very interesting surveys.
Sure, thanks for the question. It's very difficult to know if the local council is taking things on board, but they're certainly engaged. Vacancy and dereliction is a huge issue, as you know, as you've said, in Ballina, and actually Mayo County Council has one of the most active members of a local authority that I know of, Tom Gilligan, in terms of vacancy and dereliction, and he is involved and aware of this project. We're also working with the Architectural Conservation Officer, Siobhan Sexton, who's excellent. But you're absolutely right. I mean, once you start looking, it beggars belief, to be honest, and that's off the record, how people totally ignore the rainwater goods and then are maybe surprised whenever the water starts running into their homes. But also the laneways are basically being used as wide gullies. And so you then get where the wall meets the ground surface, a gap opens up, and you don't want to think about who or what is happening down there. But it is this point that it is going to get worse. If you're not maintaining it in these relatively mild conditions that we're currently living in, you're really in trouble. I teach in engineering as well, and I had a student look at the convent of Mercy, which is up in the hill, which is basically it's being brought back into use very slowly, but it has been closed up for, I don't know, 15, 16 years. Looking at the rainwater goods of that building, does it make sense to restore the rainwater goods, because a lot of it have been replaced with plastic? Does it make sense to restore the cast iron rainwater goods, or do we need to think again, because are they designed to cope with the level of rainfall intensity? It's crucial. It's not just more rain. It doesn't mean that just the bucket will have more water, that your water bottle will be doing better. It's actually the amount of water that's landing per minute is to increase significantly. And can the historic infrastructure and the contemporary infrastructure cope with that? So there's a problem with rainfall maintenance, rainwater goods maintenance, but there's also a serious problem with capacity of what exists. Is it able to cope? We may need to look at larger capacity and maybe more downpipes more frequently, etc.
I think we have time for one more question. If it's down the very end. Ian, can you?
Hi, thanks very much. This is a question for Mark. How much material or archival material has survived on the Kerry side in terms of reconstructing the world of the butter trade with Cork? Is there much material or much kind of reconstructed material?
There isn't a great deal of material. I suppose the best sources would be the O'Connell papers at UCD, which talk a lot about, which give a lot of information on butter and the trade with Cork. You could, for the later period from the 1820s, 1830s, you could reconstruct it in some detail by looking at newspapers, local newspapers, because they give the price, the current price of butter and so on. But it's very hard to put flesh on a story which is dominated by figures and sales statistics. A lot of interesting work, some interesting work has been done recently in South Kerry, in the upland areas by a UCC academic, Eugene Costello, and he's excavated upland sites which were used for transhumance in the production of butter during the summer months, for instance. And he's traced it back to the 17th century at the very earliest. But again, you're looking at places where people lived. It's a very patchy story. Another element to the earlier trade is that you need butter to produce. You need salt to produce butter. You need the salt to preserve it. Where did the salt come from in the 17th century and the 18th century? So we know salt is important into Cork in the 18th century from, I think, Portugal and England. But for the earlier period, how do you get butter? How do you get salt into very remote areas in Kerry? And where does that come from? So there are a lot of unanswered questions really about the whole, but it's hugely important to the economic fortunes and also the cultural life, because those bullying or those transhumance movements, oftentimes young women went up into these upland areas and they must have had their own seasonal culture there. So there's a whole world, I think, that has been largely lost.
Well, listen, it just remains to thank all our speakers again for their really fantastic presentations and for being so efficient with their timekeeping. Thank you very much.